Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Jeff Selingo. I'm a contributor to the Washington Post and the Atlantic, and also have a special advisor role to the president at Arizona State University. I've been moderating at Milken now for a couple of years. In fact, this is a perennial issue, the future of higher education at Milken. So hopefully one of these years we'll be able to figure out what the future is and how to solve it. I think that a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about today actually came up in the media in the last 24 hours. Last night on 60 Minutes, there was a profile on the growing economic divide among elite higher education in particular that featured a lot of what Princeton's doing, but also what the University Innovation Alliance is doing, which is a group of 11 public universities, of which Purdue is one of them, that is trying to increase the retention and graduation rate of low-income students. And then this morning, one of the lead stories in the Wall Street Journal about the tuition discount rate at universities reaching a record 49.9%. So essentially a 50% discount now at many universities on the sticker price of tuition, which makes you wonder, what is the value of the sticker price, or what is the purpose of even having a sticker price if in some cases you're discounting it by half. So we're going to try to discuss a lot of not only the financial issues, but also the future of work and the world, and how we need to prepare students for that world. So it's going to be a great conversation. We're going to leave a little time at the end for questions from the audience. We have a great panel with us today. To my far right, we have Mitch Daniels, who's the president of Purdue University, and of course, the former governor of Indiana. Bill Achtmeyer, who's the founder of Parthenon and a senior managing director now at EY-Parthenon. To my immediate left is Rafael Bras, who's the provost and executive vice president for academic affairs at the Georgia Institute of Technology. We have Yoshimasa Hayashi, who's the Minister of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology for the government of Japan. And finally, Candace Thille, who's Director of Learning Science and Engineering at Amazon.com, and also a professor at Stanford, at the Stanford Education School. You actually have a dual appointment, right? Is it just education and computer science? Yeah, okay. So we'll talk a lot about that during discussion today. So I want to put up slide 8 if we can. So in the last 18 months, Georgia Tech has led a commission there on the future of what's next in higher education, particularly looking at what Georgia Tech education should look like 20 years from now. I'm in the interest of full disclosure, I'm a visiting scholar at Georgia Tech and actually was a member of that commission. But as part of their work, they put together this list of kind of what they call drivers of change. You know, what are the big issues and topics facing higher education, mostly external factors, not only the factors that come from within higher education, but economic, technological factors that are pushing higher education in a different direction. And so I want to start with our group today, because many of these we've been talking about for a long time. There's probably some issues that are not on there. So I want to ask each member of the panel, in your opinion, what are we trying to solve for here? So what's the one problem that we really, in your opinion, need to solve when we're thinking about the future of higher education? And when I think about the future, we might be thinking 20 years, but really let's think about the next decade. And Candace, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I would say the big problem we should solve in higher education is changing the relationship between research and practice.
And what do you mean by that?
I mean by that, I'm in the Graduate School of Education. We do lots of research to understand human learning, but very little of that research about how people learn finds its way into practice, either in teaching practice or in the development of these educational technologies. So that's one direction it's broken in. The other direction it's broken in is in the other way. You can think of everything a teacher does, whether it's a faculty member or a teacher, as a small experiment. And the more that that's technology mediated, we're collecting data from those experiments, which can feed back into the research. So we are in an enviable position in higher education, not to have to put up with the suboptimal linear technology transfer model of research to practice that most other industries have to put up with. So we should take advantage. That's the big problem.
Okay. Mitch, you've seen this problem from multiple angles, both at the federal government level, at the state government level, and now from inside the institution. What's the big problem that higher ed needs to solve in the next decade?
Well, not to sound simplistic, but value.
Okay.
And value comprises, almost everything on that excellent chart. I don't see anything big missing, by the way, from Rafael's list. And one way or another, these are all in the equation that leads to value. And right now, value is being quite legitimately challenged. The quality of the character of what people are learning or hope they're learning, its relevance to their later lives, the quality, the rigor with which it's being taught,
and do you think
as a denominator, the price, which is ridiculous.
Do you think this value discussion is higher education writ large, or do you think that if we asked everybody in this room if they have children, they want to send their kids to college, I probably bet that almost every single person will raise their hands. Do you think that this is just an issue of kind of selective and top privates and publics versus everybody else, or do you think that this value issue is across the board?
I think it's the reverse. There's a stratum which is represented by the people in this room and a lot of the institutions who are here that's bulletproof and is perfectly, is very likely to continue paying whatever it is for whatever the quality is, even later when, as somebody wrote, it may turn into the debutante cotillions of the 21st century. The problem's on the other end, everybody else, for whom it's an incredible burden, and they are quite properly questioning the value of what they've gotten per dollar spent. So no, I think it's in the vast majority of schools that are challenged, and it's plenty big enough from an economic standpoint. If any meaningful percentage of what is a flattening number of traditional age students decides to go a different route, as they are being encouraged to do, you're going to have a significant shakeout, and probably deservedly so. We can talk about it later. If there's an answer to that, it's to expand the universe upward in the age brackets, and which we now have the capability to do. But I think you were asking in the context of the higher ed we've been accustomed to.
Yeah. Yoshimasa, so can we take a global view here and also in Japan? I mean, is there this value argument happening in your country as well?
Certainly, certainly. You can just call me Yogi.
Okay, Yogi.
For easy's sake. That's my American nickname. But the slide 5.
Slide 5.
Myself, the changing nature of work. And, this is number 4. And number 5, the next one, shows that this is Oxford and Nomura research for which type of works will endure and which type of the work will be replaced by AI and robots.
And so do you think that this is the biggest issue is how do we prepare people for a future of work that's changing drastically?
Because if you're on the left-hand side, the most probably your work will be disappearing.
Right.
So how to give education for the people in two senses. The one is survive this situation in coming years, and also we need the leadership of the people who lead this change efficiently without 21st century's Luddite movement, which happened at the Industrial Revolution. So how to adjust people from left-hand side to right-hand side is the very key for higher education, I think.
Rafael, you had an endorsement there from President Daniels about your list. If you had to pick one or two things on that list, what do you, and when you think about what the Commission's work was doing over the last 18 months at Georgia Tech, what's the one big issue that you think you need to solve for?
Well, I certainly will endorse what President Daniels said, the iron triangle, the affordability, accessibility, excellence is behind everything. Now, beyond that is the churn of knowledge. I think we have to realize that the world is changing very fast. Knowledge is changing at rates that are predicted to quintuple in 25 years. When you have that situation, students that we educate now really and truly are expected to do a dozen jobs, not a dozen jobs, a dozen professions coming up. And hence the idea of a system that receives students one time, gives them a good housekeeping seal, and out they go and become alums that once in a while come back and give money, is not the right model of the future, I believe. It would have to be one where people come to the institution and enter the institution very early on and forever in an episodic fashion. And as you know, and I'll address it later, but that's what in our report we call the Georgia Tech commitment, is try to transform the institution to do that.
Bill, that must probably scare some people in this idea of a lifelong education if we can't even afford 4 years. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, Rafael, but I saw you shaking your head yes when Mitch was talking about the value proposition, especially at the lower end of institutions when people are sometimes being encouraged to take alternative routes, or we see, and we saw in the latest data from the Census Bureau just recently, that the percentage of high school graduates going right on to college has dropped in the last 4 or 5 years. So fewer people leaving high school to go right to college. There may be many reasons why for that. The job market is better, so some of those people might be going into the job market, but some of them might also be deciding, maybe college is not worth it at this point. What do you see as the big issue facing higher ed?
So we believe the biggest issue is having students come out with a mindset capability. And what I mean by that is 60% of employers today say that the students lack self-direction, lack collaboration, lack communication skills, lack what in the K through 12 world would be called the grit scale. They lack that capability. And while they may know something about a particular subject matter, as we all know, given the incredible level of information that has to be assimilated today, you will always need to find yourselves being prepared to understand the process of learning and communicating. And if you're not able to do that, that foundation is very hard to make up. Lifelong learning, I think, is absolutely going to be the wave of the future. It already is. Right. And employers are looking to that regularly. But they're hoping that the college-educated student will come out not only with some career-specific skills, potentially, but also with some mindset skills.
Okay, so let's stay on that topic for a while, because it seems like the future of higher education is very closely tied more than ever before to the future of work and how that's changing. Not only how people need to get continually educated, but how do you complement technology rather than probably compete with it. So let's stay with that theme. So Mitch, Purdue got a lot of attention, I guess it was now a year and a half ago, maybe even longer, when you decided to acquire Kaplan, which now no longer exists, an online university. You decided to go big into online learning, which we know, there's more than 6 million people now have taken at least one online course. That's up from a little over 1 million just about a decade ago. So clearly online learning is part of this future. Why did you decide to acquire Kaplan, and kind of where do you see, what is the future of online learning as part of this broader ecosystem?
Well, when you're late to the party, you have some catching up to do, and that was our case.
Meaning you're late to the party, you weren't doing online
Right,
courses.
we weren't going to get there. I had, the academic mindset is ill-suited to certain things, and fast action's one of them. And so for 2 or 3 years in a row, I had given myself my lowest grade for we were stumbling around a little bit in this college, a little bit in that college, most of it amateurish, nothing cohesive. So in my business years, we would have called it a make or buy decision. Decided we weren't going to be able to build it ourselves with any competence in any reasonable time frame, and fortuitously found a partner who was interested in converting to public status, and away we went. Now, I can't answer, I've confessed often, I don't know exactly where the future's going, but I don't know exactly the direction, and I don't know the trajectory, but it isn't backwards.
Okay, so online learning you feel is going to be part of it, and so
There
you
isn't
feel
any
like
question.
that.
It's a bigger part of our on-campus experience now, either purely online courses or so-called hybrid courses, and we too I love what Rafael and his colleagues have done. We've been trying to formulate a sort of Purdue for life value proposition to our incoming students. There are roughly 18 million Americans in the traditional age bracket of 18 to 22. There are more than twice that many who started college and didn't finish and are out there somewhere.
Right. And the largest group of those people are people in their 20s.
We double, well, yes,
Yeah.
although we doubled 3 weeks ago the size of our undergraduate population when the Kaplan students became Purdue Global students. The average person in that universe of 30,000 is a 33-year-old woman, more likely minority than not, with kids and a family. And those folks are not coming back to our campus to finish what they didn't the first time. But if we can learn the ways and means of helping them do that, we'll have done a really good thing, I believe, toward this preparing the nation for this world of work that Yogi's talking about, new world of work that Yogi's talking about.
So Rafael, you mentioned that last week Georgia Tech announced this commitment to lifetime education. Can we put slide up 9? Can you talk a little bit about what that means? What is this commitment?
After the 18 months that the commission was working, what they realized or suggested was that we were, in the modern society, we're beginning to see students, for example, at Georgia Tech, and this I do preface this by saying Georgia Tech, that already come very well prepared, in fact, with college degrees. We're, in fact, operating and giving college credits, at high schools already, and many of them come to us. We also find that on the other end, we have, in fact, been in online education for quite a while. We have been offering online excellence, same degree as residential, computer science degree. We have one in data analytics. We have now about 8,000 students in those programs of very top quality for a very affordable $7,000 to $10,000 for the whole degree.
Could you repeat that price again? $7,000 to $10,000.
$7,000 to $10,000 for the whole degree, and this is a Georgia Tech degree from one of the top computer science programs and the top engineering programs in the nation. So we've seen the spectrum. So they come up with the idea saying, in the future, in 2040, that was their charge, the concept of even an admissions office would make no sense. Where we would be, in fact, interacting with the high schools, and students from the high school will be popping in and out of the Georgia Tech experience. Students may come for a slightly longer period of time in their normal 20s, but then they're going to be coming back and forth throughout their life. Our like the 34-year-old that is our student in the online programs, by the way, with 25% of them already have masters and about 10% already have PhDs. So it gives you a sense of the nature of the client or the new person, the participatory desire to learn that is ongoing. So when you create that continuum, that's what the Georgia Tech commitment is all about. We, in fact, if you ask a Georgia Tech student now, an alum, when did you graduate, they correct you. And they say, I didn't graduate, I got out. That's why we want to change that. Georgia Tech forever. In other words, we want to change that. When you ask them, I'm in Georgia Tech forever. That's the goal.
So Candace, you mentioned in the beginning kind of the technology-enabled teaching to also improve learning as well, but we've seen kind of the promise of technology for decades, right? I've been covering higher education for more than 20 years, and it always is that technology is not only going to make teaching and learning better, but it's going to, most important, reduce costs. And all it has is increased costs over that time. And in fact, when you talk to most college presidents, one of the complaints they'll have is about why does college cost so much? A lot of it is technology. But we've seen in the last couple of years kind of a new type of technology, and that's really AI, and how it's largely changing these issues around retention. So now we're using a lot more data analytics around students and helping them guide their pathways through college so that they avoid maybe the tough courses that just where they'll probably end up dropping out, or the tough majors that are just not well aligned with what they're enabled to do. So what is the promise then of AI now as we think about this next generation of technology? What is the promise of AI in the classroom particularly?
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was listening to people speak about the power of online, most people still think that the power of online is access, access and convenience. Some people think the power of online is that if you have a computer, you're connected to other people. So it's also connection. So when I do talks about technology and I ask the audience, where's the power? Most people will either say access and convenience or connectivity. And actually, I would argue what Jeff just said, that the power of this technology is not using it just to push it out, but to push it to the interface. Because in the interface, we can observe the learner. And in observing the learner, I am now at Amazon, and I'll tell you, Amazon is observing you in their interface all the time. So why? Why is Amazon observing you in their interface?
Right.
To collect data, so they can know you better. So they can know you better as an individual consumer, but so that they can know consumer trends better. And that's the same idea that we should be using in education. Not thinking of our students as consumers, but thinking of our learners as learners. And if we collect the data from the interactions we design in the interface, we can use those data to run them through different knowledge modeling algorithms.
So can you give an example of how, because we've been collecting a lot more data in higher ed over the last 5-10 years.
Yes.
Could you give an example of how it potentially could be used for the betterment of education?
Okay, so most of the data we've been collecting up to this point in time has been more sort of enrollment data, like pass-fail data, but not the granular grain-sized data that results from a learner interacting with a learning task. That at the knowledge moment where they're changing their knowledge state, that's the data that we need to be collecting. Because then we can model that and give the learner themselves and the instructor who's teaching that large group of learners real insight into where every individual student is on their learning trajectory.
So this idea of personalizing.
Yeah, but personalizing in a different way than most people think. Most people think of personalizing now as pacing. You know, you'll do this, some people do it faster, some people do it slower, but they're pretty much going to do the same thing. Or personalizing by larger groups. The truth is our science, our learning science, isn't robust enough yet to be able to articulate the different features about a learner, the different features about the context, or the different features about what is being learned, and how those features interact in meaningful ways to make a differentiation decision. And that's the power of the AI. That's a lot of dimensions. And one of the limitations of our brains is how many dimensions can we actually manage in making a decision. Not as many as an AI system can. Okay. So using that to support the instructor and the learner to make differentiation decisions.
Okay, so that's the how to teach, perhaps in the future, but now the question is
in the current.
What to teach. Oh, in current, okay.
In the current.
And what to teach. So now the question is, well, what to teach in this new world. Okay, I'm going to bring up a slide that you have, number 3, which basically shows, this is kind of a scary slide since I have young kids. Maybe it's good news for me because they'll be taking care of me in my old age. But the oldest age at which 50% of babies born in 2007 are expected to live.
Figures, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you have Japan at 107, U.S. at 104. I mean, it's clear that people are going to be living a lot longer in the decades ahead. Thus, we think they'll be working a lot longer to pay for living a lot longer, or maybe not. Maybe we'll come up with a better way to live in retirement. But so the question, and this is a question I want to direct at you and Bill, is how, given what Rafael talked about, this churn of knowledge, right? That not even one job and one occupation is going to be good enough, and that probably hasn't been true for a generation now. But now it's going to be constant churning of skills even within a job.
Yeah.
And technology, as you pointed out, is going to be taking over a lot of jobs or specific functions of some jobs. How do you teach students today to complement technology rather than compete with it? Because we used to think as long as you had more education, as long as you got more degrees, more certificates, you can always outpace technology.
yeah.
I think there's a big question now whether that's going to be true in the future.
That's a mindset problem that we are now trying to say, forget about the 3-stage life, which is education as a first stage, and then work as a second stage, and then retirement. And used to be like 80 years old is the, going to the heaven. Then you have only 10 to 20 years for the third stage. But now this shows that Japan is running fast, but we are living almost 100 years. So which means education 20 years, work 40 years, then retirement 40 years. And that's not sustainable. So that's why we are trying to say recurrent. So after graduation, you join the workforce, but from time to time, you're going back to reskill you, going back to work again, or maybe NPO and other things, and then going back and forth. And also work style is not like 1 hour from your home to workplace in a packed train, but you can work home, like making some programs, online, not only for education, but for work. So actually, this we labeled as 100 years lifetime way of education. So, and since the skill changes and technology changes so quickly, so after 10, 20 years, what you learn at the college or master course or even PhD might not work in future years. So that's why recurrent education is really important. But one problem in Japan is we have still full lifetime employment. So once you join the company, you live up to the 60, 65. So, and some percent, like 20, 30% of the people now started work as a, back and forth like every 5 years, like in the United States. So how to take a balance between those two groups and how to give recurrent education in those lifetime employment people in maybe decades to come is a question.
So Bill, you talked about mindsets earlier and kind of how to shift mindsets of students to think about this new world. But the problem I think now is, and I see Brandon Bastide from Gallup in the audience, they did this survey several years ago that found that 96% of college and university provosts, this is today of course, said students were prepared for the job market, but only 11% of business leaders agree. Right, so we already have this huge divide. So if we can't figure it out today, how do we shift? How are we able to shift what institutions are teaching, but more so how they're preparing students with these mindsets you were talking about before?
So first of all, I think there has been a lot talked about with respect to the ultimate blowing up of the higher education system, which we don't believe is true at all. 99% of the jobs that have been created in the U.S. required a bachelor's degree. So, and it's still the case that whether it's college or then master's degree, folks are earning 2 times what a high school graduate would have, or 3 times, depending on the type of master or advanced degree. So the issue, in my opinion, is not whether these institutions will exist, it's how it is they will serve the student. And there's no question that we can't anticipate a lot that's going to be happening. There are all sorts of studies saying 1/3 of the population is going to turn over in terms of their job, that 50% of the jobs will be automated. But what does that mean? If you look at a textbook publisher 50 years ago, all they did was work their tail off to get as much content into those books as they possibly could. Then they realized they had CD-ROM, so that they could get it to somebody a little bit faster. And then they started doing software. Now they're doing solutions. And so what I anticipate, a little bit like Mitch, is that we can't see what we don't know. Right. And, but I'm convinced that just as you see your kids learn at a faster pace in terms of content today than they did back when we were in school, the same will be true a generation from now. And people will have to figure out, with this incredible amount of information, how to distill it in a manner that is still digestible. And that will not be an easy task.
So that will not be an easy task. So we talked a lot about changes up here over the last half hour. And so now the question is, how does this happen, right? Is incremental change on the status quo enough, or is kind of blowing up the system better? And who does that, right? So Mitch, let me start with you on this, because you've come from multiple perspectives. And you kind of came into academia as, quote unquote, an outsider, which I know academia doesn't always love. Who does the change here? Is it academia within? Is it the influence of philanthropy? Is it the stick of government at the federal level or state level, or is it just change happening so rapidly that institutions will have to keep up?
Well, the way you formulate the question, my answer is none of the above. It's
okay.
It's the marketplace. And I'm a little less sure, confident than Bill that these data about what a college degree is worth and so forth, they're all retrospective. We're measuring the results of degrees that were conferred 5 and 10 and 20 and 40 years ago. And I'm a whole lot less sure about the ones being conferred as we sit here today. And we've learned that the 89% of those businesses who found people not ready have been using the diploma as a proxy for smarts. Yep. I don't know if they learned anything or not, but if they got in, they probably have, I may have to teach them,
right,
and acculturate them to the world of work, but they're probably bring the raw material I'm looking for.
I always thought it was a signal of having you completed something, right? You start and you complete,
yes,
right?
Maybe a little of that.
Okay.
But let's just say it's a sort of the surrogate marker. And it wouldn't be hard for the market's already out there. You chronicle this for us on a fairly frequent basis, devising some other ways to check. And there are a lot of, I'm reading, I maybe or may or not be right, Candace, but I read that Amazon, a significant 1 in 7 or 6 hires recently, doesn't have a college degree, but they can code or they can do whatever it is that they can test for that. And so I do think there's a real need there will be a need for those schools who want to survive and thrive to address that question. One way is, I think we've all learned, is it's always been a smart thing to try to integrate some sort of work experience, internship or more, side by side with the learning. And I think we hope to universalize it at our school, because we think that's one thing we know really works when the graduate goes on and enters the workforce.
Rafael, how is this going to happen at Georgia Tech? You released this to the campus last week. There's a big section in there about culture. How does the culture need to change to react to the things you're suggesting, to the ideas you're suggesting?
Yeah, first of all, I do not believe, at least speaking from Georgia Tech and Georgia Tech-like institutions, the system is not completely broken. And indeed, we have a higher education university that is reasonably nimble. We move fast. We've been doing things that others have been talking about for a while. So we feel good that we have some values that we cannot and will not throw away. Now, having said that, it is clear that the world around us is changing very fast, and I agree with previous comments that those institutions that are not unwilling to adjust and move fast are in trouble and will be in trouble. We have, as part of that report, in fact, the last section of that report talks about creating a culture of innovation in the institution and reorganizing the institution to really have a systematic approach to innovation. Pretty much that innovation is promoted in modern business and the way we promote entrepreneurship even within our own institution, but internalize that on the way the institution works. So that's, and again, we're a pretty nimble one. We want to make ourselves even more nimble and more able to react quickly, because we're going to have to. But I repeat, we do. We talking AI. We've done that. Jill Watson. I don't know if anybody has heard of Jill Watson. Well, that is an AI agent that in fact was a TA in our online courses, and the students did not know it.
They thought she was a real person.
They thought she was a real person. And it learned as it went around. So we are already adopting that in all our courses. AI, not only in TAing, but in tutoring, in helping in the learning, even taking away some of the more menial parts of mentorship. So we are in that. I think what I get the message I'm trying to say, we need to change. We need to make sure we're as nimble as possible, and we have to put in place a culture that promotes and allows that. Having said that, I'm not throwing away the baby with the water. We have a good baby. and I don't see any need whatsoever to do that. One last comment, if you allow me, because you started with a quote of the business leaders and provosts differing so much. The answer of that difference is that both top business leaders and provosts are out of touch, period. Really and truly. I honestly believe that. I think the business leaders are wrong, and I believe the provosts are wrong. It is not that way at all.
Candace, what's your thought on this? You now have kind of a foot in the academic world. You have a foot in the business world. As we think about the changes that need to happen in higher ed, where is the real pressure and the ideas and the money, because we haven't even talked about the money to do this, where is it going to come from?
So I think it's going to come from both. So that's kind of a, but I would say that the issue that both higher education and the business world need to be focusing on right now, with the emergence of what I'm talking about, which are technology-mediated learning experiences that are collecting evidence about learners pretty constantly. And so that will mean, I think, in the future, that the notion of a degree may not be as relevant.
Because it's going to be about skills rather than degrees.
Because if you have a whole body of data that I can run an algorithm across to make a pretty good prediction about what that learner is capable of doing and has done, then in the future, I would imagine that degrees will become portals into that data set. And then a company that's wanting to hire someone will say, I'm looking for 10 people, kind of like these 10 people that already work for me. And I can't describe necessarily explicitly in a human way what it is that I'm looking for in those 10 people, but my algorithms will know. So I want to run the algorithms over those 10 people to say what makes them like them, and then run the algorithm over the data you have about those learners and let it surface for me 20 people that are the highest top probability of being like the people that I want to hire. So in that future, then the question of how do we, two things. How do we protect the data so that we set norms and standards about what is expected to be disclosed and not disclosed? And then the other thing, which you started to touch on, which is whenever you're training algorithms on existing data, you are going to instantiate the biases that are already represented in that data, unless you consciously choose to do otherwise. So the other sort of pressure that I think is on higher education and industry is not just to blindly train algorithms on data, but to look at the patterns that those data are revealing to us and make decisions about, is that the future we want to continue to perpetuate, or how do we adjust the parameters to maybe mitigate some of our own historical biases.
Right, which could be based on gender, income, race, geography. Whatever.
Yes, all kinds of things that we may not even be aware we have unconscious biases.
Yogi, could you give us a perspective from Japan? Where is the pressure coming there? You talked about kind of this idea of lifetime employment and so forth, but is the pressure coming from government entities within higher ed or from business?
I think, like Mitch said, the market, and we started to have a communication channel within with our ministries and also Keidanren, which is a federation of the big business, and also the college business collaboration has to be having been to have some innovations, like some department of the university and some part of the companies collaborating to do some specific innovation. But we are trying to enlarge this as a whole university versus whole company. which includes like business administration, economics, law, ethics, versus whole company as a strategical department inside it. So by that communication, college might easily know what type of people that company would like to hire in coming years. And that should be, included in the curriculum making in the university side too. So that's what we are trying to do, to induce them, because we don't have a stick to do that as a ministry. So that's very important things. And another point is I have more worry about the human and social science side, because natural science side, tech side, is more articulated. So people know which type of things, and in coming years, this type of technology will be going so and so. But on the other hand side, law, economies, and business administration, still we need more collaboration between the business and university, because we don't have that history, long history of MBA like in the United States. So that big companies used to hire those people in the social science side, law or economy degree, not by the skills they acquired at college, but the college name. Oh, you're from Tokyo University, or you're from Kyoto Universities. That's okay. We're gonna,
Which
train
is what
you.
I think is going to change
Yeah,
by what
yeah.
Candace just brought up.
That's right. So that's the things that we have to.
Okay. So we're going to go to audience questions in just a couple of minutes. I want to ask President Daniels a question, because I've been covering higher ed for 20 years, and what really seems to be shifting to me is kind of the attitude of the public at large and lawmakers in the states around higher education, right? Of course, they long thought it was a private good, not a public good, which I know many of your counterparts among presidents are very upset about, and they wish that it would come back to be a public good. But now it seems there's like this negative view of higher education. Indeed, last year, Pew Research Center did a study, and it found that 6 in 10 Republicans or Republican-leaning voters said they had a negative view of higher education, which was a sharply pessimistic turn in perceptions. What's happening here? Because I'm assuming that this is, if all these voters think that higher education is not necessarily good for the country, that's not a good thing for higher education.
Well, it's very real, and I think it'd be unfortunate if people in the sector were in denial about it. I think some have been. I've seen failing businesses. I've seen losing political campaigns. The instinct is, well, we're just not telling our story. Nothing wrong with the story. We're just not telling it well. Fire the press secretary. There's still a lot of that going on I think in some places in higher ed. I'm less focused on the particular data point you mentioned, because I think it's not that it isn't real and that it isn't a subject for legitimate inspection, but a component of that particular data point clearly is the ideological bias, and which is is real, and the enforced conformity of thought, and that's a real problem. But set that aside. Maybe we'll grow out of it.
Right. Maybe they'll evolve over time and change.
I think the biggest piece of the skepticism is back where we were talking before, that there's just not, this is not real value, that we're being charged extraordinary amounts
part
of
of
money.
this goes back to affordability.
Yes,
Right.
and for what? And way too many people now who have left with that we thought essential credential are unable to pay off the cost that they incurred to get it.
Mitch, you have froze tuition at Purdue how many years in a row?
Well, 7, which includes the next 2 we've announced for the next 2. So
how have you been able to do it and most other institutions haven't?
I'd love to tell you something. We did something heroic, but I don't feel that way at all. We made that a priority. People adjusted to it. We said this is one thing we all agree on, and this we disagree, thank goodness, about so many things on this campus. But we agree that we want this to be a place. We're a land grant school. A lot of people don't even know that. We still are deeply imbued with the thought that we are there to open the doors of higher ed as widely as possible. So it'll be less expensive because of room and board reductions. It'll be less expensive to attend our university in 2020 in nominal dollars than it was in 2012. And it has not, and meanwhile, I can document all this. We've made major investments in the quality. We would never sacrifice quality. We have more faculty than before. We have one of the highest ratios of tenure track faculty to total in the country, and have sustained it. So it's not impossible. It's a matter of, we found, of establishing priorities and obviously looking for efficiencies outside the core mission of teaching and research.
Let's open it up for some questions from the audience. I want to try to get to as many as we can, so if you please ask a question rather than make a speech, that would be helpful. Let's start over here.
Could I just ask you to comment on what you think the future is in higher ed of a better integrated system of counseling and guidance, both course guidance and career guidance? I think many people would agree that that's lacking today.
Anybody want to take that, Rafael?
Yeah, we would agree. In fact, we find that many of the students, even in a place like Georgia Tech, where they're pretty focused overall, but they tend to wander around too much. There's a lot of energy wasted in indecision and lack of information. So, in fact, as part of this effort, we're planning to revamp the whole guidance and advising system to really deal with separated in several. There's advising and there's advising. there are different levels and different levels of approaches and touch that are required, and we tend to lump it all up together, and that doesn't work very well.
I mean, part of the problem has always been scale of these things, right? Because small liberal arts colleges with only 1,200, 1,400, 2,400 students can do this really well. The problem is scale, and again, Candace, that's probably where AI can help in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, but AI will do it only in certain realms and in collaboration with the people.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to try to get to as many as you can. Go ahead.
On the mindset issue, I feel like it's a leadership mindset issue because I've been teaching close to 20 years, and I feel like faculty pay is not where it needs to be. And when we're teaching students to go out and get jobs and get good paying jobs, they look at the faculty and we don't get paid. And if they change, so is there a way to fix that mindset from the leadership perspective? And then the second part of it is so many of our students are what I call instructional learners. They're YouTube learners. Like if we were to go live right now, they would learn a lot. And so is the model in the future changing towards instructional learning where you're presenting most of the information online? Because I open my class up online and people chime in and they learn for free.
Candace, do you have any thoughts on that second one? In
Yes.
terms of the learning
Yes, so
styles?
actually the way people learn is not just, so explanation plays an important part in learning, but experience plays a much bigger part in learning. And often the way and they both are important, but we're often doing them in the wrong order, where we explain to you what it is you're going to need to know. Trust me, you're going to need to know this. Listen, make sense of it, and then you'll experience it. But actually what we need to do is give learners, and we can do this now in the technology-mediated environment, experiences that help them highlight and run into and struggle the things that then when we explain them, they'll have a cognitive structure where they know where to put it. And that's a much better way of accelerating learning, using the online. So if you just record your lecture and make it available online, that's actually not, I don't think that's the right way to be using the technology. It's just essentially delaying the backwards way of doing instruction.
And I guess I didn't understand your first question. Is that in order to kind of recruit the next generation of teachers and professors, you just think they need to be paid more to make it more prominent position? Yeah. Okay. Yes, right here.
Sorry, thank you. What I found interesting was
And then I'll get to the back, I promise.
a big switch from the traditional concept of college and university to more of a vocational school at the exact same time that we're talking about people going from working 30 years to people working about 60 years. And so to me, one, I don't know if the problem lies with higher education at all, or if it lies with business expectations of people vocationally trained for the first of 12 jobs. And so is there any conversation with business that rather than just it being the imprimatur of where you go, but it's really a proof of your ability to learn, which is real. Is there any conversation with business about, here are people that are able to learn, and if you're able to switch them, if you're able to teach them, that'll really be the solution for the next 60 years.
Okay, I think that switch, by the way, happened because of affordability. When it became so expensive, people wanted to make sure there was a payoff. Anybody want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think there's no question that the number of business gatherings, whether it's in Michigan, Massachusetts, California, of coming together and working with higher education institutions is much more in vogue today than it ever was, and it will continue to be so. Going back to the governor's comment about value, businesses know that they are going to be desperate for people, and if we don't set aside the immigration issue, but if we just look at where we stand today, unless businesses play a huge role in the educational development of people, they will not be able to get what they need. And so they're joining forces to try to figure out how to, all the way back into the elementary schools, work with educators so that when the students come out, they may have a chance of succeeding in those businesses.
Rafael?
Let me follow up. In our case, what we try to do is mingle them. Technology Square at Georgia Tech, it has hundreds of companies from Fortune 500s to hundreds of startups. What we do with the students and the space there, about 50% is private sector, 50% is us, and they're all together. So the students are engaged constantly in that process of learning by doing in many ways.
Yes, who has the microphone in the back?
So I've been reading a lot recently. A lot of these alternative colleges are doing income share agreements. They're giving away the instead of charging tuition and then doing a percentage of the
Not
income.
just alternatives, Purdue's doing it too.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
cool. I would just want to know your thoughts on that. If you think that's going to continue, and if these universities that you're involved with are doing that,
You
or
wanna take
have
that?
plans for that.
Okay. Since Purdue's probably the most prominent of kind of not the alternative, but traditionals doing that. You want to talk about that, Mitch?
We're about to enter our third year, our third cohort. About a couple hundred students have taken this option the first 2 years. As we build up repayment history, we'll all learn a lot more. We don't think it's a replacement at all for the student assistance network or system that we have, but it's definitely better than some of the Parent Plus loans and expensive private loans. And I describe it, for those who aren't familiar, it's a concept that's been around a long time but never tried in this country. It's in practice in South America, where they don't have Pell Grants and loans. And the simple way to think about it is it's not debt, it's equity. And the risk shifts entirely from the student to the investor. And we're about to put our second fund together, but so far so good is what I can tell you. And the students who are involved and their families are really happy about it. It fixes both the percentage of income, whatever that happens to be. If it's zero, they don't pay anything. It fixes the percentage of income and the term of years at both very affordable and or reasonable limits, and so it's proven appealing. And we hope we can establish enough history that a lot of other schools will and investors will come on in.
Okay, this is going to be our last question. Right here.
Yes, good morning. My name is Ambassador Ruben Brigady. I'm Dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. So regarding the future of higher education, could you talk about the future of tenure? And particularly as relates, as we've all talked about, is about trying to sort of match work requirements with what's actually happening in the classroom. Thank you.
It's the third rail of academic politics. Anybody want to take that on?
We have no intention of changing tenure concepts. We do have constant evaluation of even tenure faculty, so that doesn't necessarily imply that you can abandon your responsibility. And in essence, what we do see is that when I look at the total employment and the people we engage in different functions, that mixture is changing. We have 1,100 faculty members that are tenure track, And we have thousands of people that are researchers, that engage in laboratories, that engage in teaching, that do all sorts of other things.
Okay, we have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to go to each panelist. Let's do a little crystal ball here. What does higher education look like a decade from now? Kind of pick anything. Yogi, I'm going to start with you.
Wow,
Sorry.
I don't have a crystal ball. At least higher education doesn't produce people like Otani here in Los Angeles, but we need two types of people to have a leadership to lead the society 5.0 with the full technology with AI. But the important thing is the survival skill for middle zones in those situations. So, and communication between the market, business, and the college will be very important. And we also don't have a big stick as a ministry. We're going to induce them to do so.
Okay, perfect. Bill?
There'll be fewer institutions. The institutions that have very little endowment.
Will they close, merge? What will they do? Combination of both?
Combination of both. Right. Just a couple days ago, a school in Boston, Mount Ida School, all of a sudden announced overnight, sort of like the Midnight Massacre, that they were going out of business, having 2 weeks earlier talked about all sorts of wonderment, and they combined with the University of Massachusetts. So there'll be fewer of them, but the ones that will survive will have figured out how to adapt technology as well as the value proposition.
Mitch?
Fewer institutions, faster throughput, shorter time to degree, helped both by some credentials on the way in, study coming out of high school, some by speeding up the clock while they're there, and much broader spectrum of age. The adult learner, I think, in whatever you said, 20 years will be a very big part of what we will then call higher ed.
Okay. Rafael?
Yes, I do agree that higher education will have fewer institutions, but let me describe those that will be differentiated more than they are now. We tend to pull everything together under one banner, and it's not.
Right, there's no higher ed system.
There's no higher, there are different goals, different missions, and I think that will be differentiated. Second, I think technology will increase its presence, and when done well, it's like Candace says, it will be together with the people. That's going to be increasingly more evident. Flexibility, a variability of a more varied set of credentials and ways of interacting. And from our perspective, a continuum. Again, it's not going to be 4, 6, 7, 8 years at Georgia Tech. It will be an engagement practically for life.
And finally, Candace.
An explosion in our understanding of how human learning happens. So that, and then the processes that we're using to support teaching and learning will be based in that, based in be continuously improving that understanding.
Please join me in thanking this terrific panel for what I think was a good discussion. Thank you.